All right. So yeah, normally there would be two of us here. Now it's just me, Tom. My colleague Koen couldn't make it today, so I had to sort of pivot at the last moment, hence also the change of the content of the slides. So since you're all here at JuliaCon, I guess the general vibe in the room is that we all think that Julia is great, but getting a project to actually use Julia, like convincing your colleagues, your managers, like, hey, we should really use Julia for this, it can be a bit difficult. It can be really get some hurdles there. And some of it is just, gut feeling. Change is always a bit scary, but some of it is really like just some justified concerns. Because if you have to switch over to something else, well, there's some really valid concerns about, is it feasible to do the project? It doesn't cost more, and how maintainable, how this will in fact impact maintainability. These are all very valid concerns, and we have to address them if we want to go to them and say like, hey, use this new thing. And at CUX, we've seen this with customers, with internal projects. We've seen this again and again. And from our experience, we noticed that the same questions always keep popping up. And then you, as the local Julia enthusiast who's saying like, hey, we really should use Julia for this, it's kind of up to you to come up with a good answer to all of these questions. Questions like, are there enough experienced developers? Because you might be here right now, but probably one developer is not enough to do the entire project. And also, years down the line, let's say 7 years from now, who is going to maintain this thing? You might not be around anymore. Is it a fad? So many computer languages have come and gone. They pop up for a couple of years, are super popular, and then they get relegated to the dustbin of history. Same thing goes here. Is it a fad? You need to have an answer to that. Maturity of the ecosystem. Are we going to have to develop everything ourselves in-house? Or is there an ecosystem out there with packages that we can rely on? Lacking infrastructure. There's a whole bunch of CI/CD set up already for like Java, C++, Python, what have you. But quite often, if you're the first guy saying like, hey, use Julia for this, none of this is around. So you need to also have an answer to that. And this last one, that's the one I'm sort of going to address a little bit today, is people saying like, but it's kind of difficult to use Julia. If I want to use Python, I just download Conda, download PyCharm, and I'm good to go. And have a good development experience. So why does it seem a bit more difficult with Julia? Why does it seem to be that case? And if you ask me, I would say because we're kind of lacking the tools to hide issues. If you catch me on a very cynical day, I will probably say something like, an IDE is just smoke and mirrors to hide problems with languages. So yeah, if you think about it, let's say you're going to write some C++ program. Nowadays, if you're working on Windows, just download Visual Studio and you're good to go. It can do everything for you. But if you ever were to sit down with just Notepad and a command line terminal with a compiler, writing anything that's non-trivial, it's going to be a pain. You will never be able to figure this out. Okay, what compiler flags do I need to pass along to link to this DLL? It's a nightmare, basically. But then you have an IDE that says like, no problem, I will take care of all of this for you. And you have a great experience. So yeah. Julia is kind of playing catch-up to the other ones there. Like we have all these great IDEs, PyCharm, IntelliJ, Visual Studio, but these are for languages that have been around for decades longer than Julia. They all know, these are sort of the issues that we have to sort of solve in our IDE environment. But with Julia, we're just only sort of getting started with that. But I would say there's already more out there than you might think. When I started talking to some other Julians, I started noticing like, all these packages that I think are sort of essential to have a good developer experience in Julia, they're not using them. They don't know them. So I'm going to highlight a few of those, and then maybe you come away with some ideas here today, maybe for yourself, but maybe also for this colleague who's saying like, I'm having a bit of a difficult time getting started. Then you can say like, hey, here's a few packages that might help you out. The first package I'm going to talk about today is the -first package I'm going to talk about today. Minus because it's not a package at all. It's VS Code. So if you haven't been using VS Code, it's if I'm being very cynical here today, it's just a fancy text editor. But with some extensions, there's a really good Julia extension there. It sort of forms the basis for what you would call an IDE. So there's a bunch of them out there. It does some basic syntax checking, which is nice. Some code formatting. You have a built-in REPL. Can do some simple refactoring. That's one of the things I would say, like, some improvement can be done there. The refactoring, if you compare the one in VS Code with one in PyCharm, they're light years ahead of us. That could use some work, I would say. But it's already a big improvement from just, typing some Julia by hand. Also interesting to note, some of the packages that I would think are really useful for development, they're already sort of baked into the Julia extension there. So there might be a few of them around that you have been using without even realizing it. The second package I'm going to talk about today is the -epsilon package I'm going to talk about today. Why -epsilon? Because it's still not a package, but we're one step beyond -1. And so we're not yet at 0 here. So the startup.jl, it's a startup script for your Julia. It's kind of like your bash RC, but then for Julia. So every time when you start Julia, it will execute this script. And it can be pretty much anything. I hope that's a bit visible. It's not too important what it exactly says here. This is just a startup.jl I took from a colleague. But you can do anything there. You can load packages, make sure that certain packages are installed. You can set environment variables. For example, with my startup.jl, if I spin up a virtual machine, I can just drop it in there, and it will install all the packages I would like to use immediately. But you can do basically whatever you want in that. If you don't know, it's in your .julia folder. You can just, there might be a folder there, config. If it's not there, you can just make it. For some reason, they don't always have this by default there. And if you just drop a file called startup.jl there, that's the thing it will just execute. Could be very useful. Also interesting to note, there is a command line flag for your Julia command that can turn this off. So if you're just doing some batch processing, you can just easily say like, okay, startup equal to off, and it will not launch this. Okay, the first package, now the first real package for today, OhMyREPL. So let me demonstrate this. So I have here a Julia terminal. I hope that's big enough. You can see here up at top, I started it with startup file equal no, because yeah, this OhMyREPL stuff, it's in my startup file because I use it all the time. But then I can't really show you what the contrast is. I have here my Julia terminal. I can do things like usual. And I can start defining a function. No, I did not type it correctly. Function, f of x. And I say x is a number. And then we're going to do something silly. Just take the exponential of 5 times x plus 8. Doesn't really matter what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of making a point at. It's all white. The braces, yeah, which one matches up with which one? I have to kind of stare at it. It works, sure, but it's a bit of a pain. So now I'm going to load in OhMyREPL. And if I now want to do something similar, things are lighting up. Much easier to read. Oh, but I need to type this correctly. Much easier to read. And also, if I then were to do something similar, that's 5 times x plus 8 minus 9. You see the braces, they're colored with different colors. So they indicate clearly, oh, this brace matches this brace. And if I put my cursor next to one of them, this might be a bit hard to see, but there's like a really tiny line underneath the brace that's next to my cursor. And there's one also on the other side, the one that matches it. Makes it a lot easier to just read what you're typing. Okay, back to the slides. Yeah, so OhMyREPL is just basically a bunch of REPL enhancements. Yeah, I showed off the syntax highlighting. There's the bracket improvements. Something I didn't really show here, there's also a really nice fuzzy search. You know that in your REPL, if you tap your arrow key, you go up, 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 up through your command history. But then you're thinking, oh, wait, I had this command that I entered 5 hours ago. What was it again? I need it again. If you hit Control-R, it's just some hotkey combination, you enter into this fuzzy search, you can start typing things, and it does sort of a fuzzy search of your history. Could be very useful to find these things again. There's also a bunch of customizations you can do here. Might be something neat to put into your startup.jl. If you say like, oh, the standard REPL, I don't really like it, I want to change something there, you can put it over there. Yeah, so OhMyREPL, real big recommendation. Second one, revise. Somebody already mentioned revise here today. Definitely going to second that. You really, really need revise. Why is that? So let's say I have some Julia package here. It just doesn't really matter what it says here, just some things. And I'm going to start using it. First, I have to make sure that my environment is correct. And then I can do using my package. Okay, nothing too spectacular here. I'm going to call the greet function. Okay, I'm going to say hello to all of you. So hello, JuliaCon. But now I want to put something else here. Let's say I'm not just really enthusiastic, I'm really, really enthusiastic about saying hello to JuliaCon, so I'm going to get some more exclamation marks here. Oh no, it's still the same. And now I'm kind of stuck here. I kind of have to just close my REPL, start it up again, because otherwise it will just keep doing the same thing. That's not great for development, because we really, we want people to write packages. And if you run into this stumbling block, then people say, writing something in a package is a pain. I'm just going to put everything on the REPL. Once I'm done, I copy it over, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not a good way of working. So let's not do that. And I'm going to get rid of that REPL because I'm no longer going to need it. Because now I can just use the built-in REPL from VS Code, because this one will use my startup script, which contains revise. I have like this neat info messages there saying like, hey, I'm loading all these packages. So now I can do the thing I just did before. Oh yeah, also note VS Code is very helpful, already dropping you in the correct environment because it's recognized, hey, I'm in a Julia environment here. So I can just type it using my package. Give it a second to load. My package.greet. Okay, but we're not surprised by this because, yeah, okay, I started a new REPL, so of course it's using the new version of the code. But now I can go here and be a little bit less enthusiastic again. And there we go. Now we have the updated code. So you notice there was like a slight delay. That's just revise noticing like, hey, something changed. Going to recompile this for you. Here's the updated version. Do note there's a few limitations here. So with functions, no problem at all. But now I have here the struct definition. If I were to change this to int64, then revise will notice like, hey, something changed, but he will immediately shout at me saying like, hey, what you did, I can't do that. So he immediately says here, invalid redefinition of this type. So he's telling you like, hey, can you maybe fix this error and then try again? So let's do that. So go back to float64, and then it's just a really easy revise.retry, yeah. And then, okay, it's not really visible, yeah. Usually I'm not using the light theme, but yeah, this shows up better on the screens. This one was sort of yellowish, now it's green again, so everything is good again. Okay. Back to the slides. So yeah, revise, it automatically reloads code. I would say this sort of enables package-centric development, because without it, it's really a pain. It's gonna take way too long, and we don't wanna sit around waiting to reload our REPLs all the time. Also enables test-driven development, because now you can sort of experiment on your REPL. Oh, it's not quite doing what I wanted to. Change it a bit. Not quite. Change it a bit. Okay, now it's there. It really smooths out your development curve, I would say. Few caveats here. Doesn't work for a few things. Yesterday, there were some rumors swirling about people saying like, no, you can make it work. Other people saying, nah, I don't think you can do this. So maybe this will change in the future. Well, let's see. Okay. So the next two packages, the first one you already see here, ReTest, they're going to be test-focused. So I'm going to switch back to the code and take a look at some tests there. So running tests in Julia, very easy. I can just go to the package manager, type test, then give it a second while it runs all the tests. There we go. Okay, so we see, okay, a whole bunch of tests passed, a few failed, but the main thing here is that, oh, there seem to be some problems with the G function. But if I now change the G function and run my tests again, I can only type test and kind of stuck there. I have to run all the F tests too, even though I didn't change F at all. That's again, it's sort of a slowdown, delay in your development process. Now it's not too bad, but what if these tests for F were like really slow, or I had way more tests? You don't want to sit around and wait for that. I'm only changing G. So how do I do that? Well, that's where this ReTest package comes in. It's actually only a small change with respect to the usual way of testing. So with the usual way of testing, you just have the run test.jl file, and you just run that, and it contains all the tests you need. But now what you do is you actually wrap all your tests in this module. And the convention, well, sort of the standard there is to just say the name of your package with then the suffix tests, then also in a file with the same name. And then instead of doing using test, it's using ReTest. And that's basically it. If you just do that, you're using ReTest. So what I can do now is I can say, I can include this file. Oh wait, no, I can't. So there's a really good reason why I cannot do this. I have here ReTest. I have here CSV. These are my test dependencies. I do not have them in my normal package. Why would I? For example, it might be that my package has nothing to do with using CSVs at all, but I might have some data there that I want to run my package. Same thing with ReTest. You do not read ReTest for running your package, so you don't need it. So how do you handle that? Well, yeah, what you usually do is you just have this project.toml here. You specify your test dependencies. But how do you end up in an environment where you can actually run your code and at the same time also have these test dependencies available? And that's where the second test-based package comes in. It's called testenv. And it's a really nice function just here, testenv activate. And what it does, it drops me into a temporary environment. You can recognize this temporary environment by this sort of JL underscore and then some nonsense prefix. If you don't know about temporary environments, check out the documentation for them. I will use them quite often. They're really, really useful. And you can see that I have a few packages installed here. So CSV and ReTest, these are just my test dependencies. And then my own package is installed as this sort of, reference to a local path. Also, if you don't know about that, with the Julia package manager, you can just install Julia packages that are only existing on your local file system. Just do add the path on your local file system, and you have it. So now I am actually in an environment that I can actually start using all my test dependencies. I could do the include again, but actually ReTest is something a bit more elegant for that. I can just do retest.load, and then the name of my package. Oh, yeah, I have to do using ReTest first, of course. And also using my package. And then it immediately knows, oh, because I'm following this convention, it knows where this module is located. If the REPL wants to respond, yeah. So then I have now this my package tests module available. Actually, it's also really neat that I have this as a module, because now, okay, all the variables that are defined, all the variables that are defined in here, which I might use for doing tests, I have access to them on my REPL. Otherwise, it's sort of locked away in some script, but now because it's a module, I can just load it in without executing everything that's in there. If this was just a script, yeah, I would have to include it, but then including it would also execute everything, which you do not want. Oh. And now there is this really handy function here called run tests. So there's a run test function. If I just call this without any arguments, it runs all the tests. But now I want to run only the tests that are relevant for G. And this is sort of my particular flavor of doing things. You can pass in a string here. This string will filter the test sets that you have defined, and it will filter it on the names of your test sets. And I personally like to sort of make this hierarchy in my name of my test sets. So I have my test set G, which contains this test set G dash something something. I like to do this sort of dashes to make this sort of hierarchy in my test sets. And then it will filter on like all the test sets that start with G dash. I can actually also say like, oh, but actually only the tests that are from the CSV are failing. So I can put in here G dash CSV. And as you can see, now it only ran the tests that start with G dash CSV. So some very, very simple string matching. If you want to do something more fancy, you can actually put in a regex there, and it will then use the regex to filter all the test set names. So this really speeds up your development process, because now you can just run only the tests that are relevant to the code you're changing. And once you're done, if you really want to be sure, okay, run them all again. Okay, back to the slides. So ReTest, testing framework, only a small change with respect to test. It's really easy to filter tests. Something that I didn't really show here is that it also allows you to run all your tests in parallel. So this is a bit of a bigger change with respect to test. ReTest really enforces that all your test sets are independent of each other. If you define a variable in one of them and you try to use it in the other one, it will say like, no, you can't do that. And yeah, this is exactly for this reason. You can just use distributed, run everything parallel. Again, you gain some speed there. Testenv, yeah, I showed this one. You have this kind of problem with test dependencies because there's no sort of like merge environments function. And this will then create this temporary environment with your package and your test dependencies in them. Okay, so I've shown you some of my favorites here today, but we're running out of time, so I kind of have to stop here. I have a bunch more written here down. I also have a bunch more to talk about if you ask me later. But do you have any favorites? Please share them, because we can only learn from each other in this way. And also, what's your experience in trying to convince your colleagues and your managers to start using Julia? Especially if you think back to those questions I have from before. There's probably some really good answers to all those questions, but you need to share it with each other, then we can learn. And also, if you need any help, please reach out. We're here with the whole community. Some of us have successfully introduced Julia in projects. So yeah, ask around. To us personally, you can say like, hey, I need some help here because these and these reasons are a bit difficult here. But also on a professional level, hey, there's these companies who are actually using Julia. You can reach out. But of course, the main thing is here, you're not alone. reach out. We have a great community. So yeah, let's help each other make Julia happen.
Thank you. So I think Tom made it clear he doesn't want questions, he wants suggestions, right?
Yeah.
So any suggestions?
But questions are also good.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you use it, but for a debugger, what do you ever use a debugger?
Yeah, so that's the infamous debug question. So personally, I've never really used the Julia debugger because back when I started using Julia, it really wasn't good. Nowadays, I've heard it's much better, but I've really noticed from just the way I write Julia code, I don't really use it that often. But I do like Infiltrator. I did use Infiltrator maybe like 2 or 3 times in the past 2 years or something like that. And I've used a debugger never.
Okay.
So
yeah,
don't really use it that much.
I recently started with Infiltrator. And there's also some great packages that help you make documentation.
Yes, Documenter, use those.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's also a really good one. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Oh, right behind you.
Hi, so I have 2 questions. The first one is if I'm working on a team, I like to define within the team a format on how we develop code. So first question is, how would you do formatting and define something around that?
Yeah, so for formatting with Julia, there is a sort of standard Julia formatter, and it has a bunch of settings, and these settings you can save them into like something like .julia formatter file or something like that. So you can just agree on, because that's also a whole discussion in and of itself, what's the exact formatting you're going to use in your team. I've been in discussions that went on for weeks about this over a year in some of my projects. So, but as soon as you sort of settle on, okay, this is how we're going to format our code, you can sort of just drop in this file. Then the formatter will pick up on this file, and then you can sort of you can say run it manually, but there's also things that you can do with like Git hooks to make sure that it runs every time before you commit. So there's options there. Yeah.
Okay, nice. And the second question is. In Python, I would use something like Tox to run it on different Python versions. Is there like an equivalent in Julia?
I don't know exactly by heart. So what I do know is that with GitHub Actions, it's actually really easy to run your GitHub Actions on many Julia versions. But to run it locally, I don't really know. You could always just use Julia up to manage some number of different amount of Julia versions installed locally, but of course I can kind of understand that, it's not the nicest way of doing things, but I haven't really run into the use case yet myself that I really had to check multiple Julia versions.
All right, cheers.
I think we might have time for one last question while you set up and Tom hands you the mic. One last question for Tom? No? Okay, well then, another round of applause, I guess.